My name's Adam. Welcome to the compost demonstration site. In this space we have a number of different kinds of compost bins. Not one compost bin fits all living conditions and situations. In this video I hope to give you an idea of some of the different options available and give you some pros and cons of each of the bins so you can decide what will work best for you. This is some printed material that we have. It's a pamphlet called Choose Your Compost Bin. On the inside is a rough guide of whether you live on a large property, in a house on a small lot, or in an apartment with no outside space, what kinds of compost bins you could consider. And then inside are these specific bins with advantages and disadvantages for each, along with a handy grid for how much they cost, how much setup time is required, the maintenance effort, and how quickly you get finished compost. And so you can flip through and compare the different bins and decide what might work best for your situation. You can find this on the internet at ccetompkins.org/compost. On that page, you click on Compost Resources, and you'll find an online version of this guide. So starting with a compost bin for a larger property, this is a 3-bay compost bin made out of wood. There are posts in the ground, and it is made out of black locust, so it will rot in decades. And that's how it's designed. And you can see there's a lot of space for grass clippings, weeds, food scraps, leaves, and other things you might have as a homeowner with a large property or garden space. This is a bird's nest bin, and it's sometimes called a binless bin because there's no real structure to it other than the sticks and branches and stalks that are arranged in the shape of a bin. And inside, in the space you make inside, you can compost your food scraps and leaves and other less stocky materials. This is called a pallet bin, and it is also larger in size than some of the other standalone bins. It's fairly inexpensive to make one of these. You just need to get your hands on some pallets, and the way I've set it up here, it's on a hinge that swings open when you need to take material out. So it can be held on the corners with wire, or you can use hardware to screw it on the corners to hold the pallets up in place. This is the welded wire bin. We'll come back and talk about this in more detail, but it's made out of welded wire fencing. And you can see the size of this is at least 3 feet, but it can go larger, 4 feet or even 5 feet in diameter if you have a lot more material to put in there. Here we're coming to some more of the commercial bins that are available. There are a lot of different types of bins that you'll find made of tough plastic, and you can find these at yard and garden stores. Sometimes hardware stores carry them. This is another wire bin, but this one is coated with plastic, and that way the wire doesn't rust. If the bin gets to be too large in diameter, sometimes you'll have a chimney that you can put in the middle to help make sure that air can get to all parts of the material in the bin. And you can make a homemade chimney out of PVC pipe and drill some holes in it as well. Some of the compost tumbler varieties, I call this a compost barrel. It's on a frame and it spins end over end. And this is a way you can turn the material easier than shoveling or pitchforking it from one place to another. This particular bin does not have a lot of air holes. It just has one here, one on this side. And to get into the material, you unclamp it and take off the top. It does have another hole here. That's a barrel. This is more of a tumbler. You can see that this bin has quite a few air holes in it, probably too many. For the size of this bin, it does tend to dry out quite easily, but this is how this bin tumbles. And all of these bins kind of have the same idea, that it makes it easier to turn the material by being on some mechanism to spin end over end or on an axis. And then on to the earth machine bin. We'll be focusing more on this bin in the coming segment because it's one of the more popular bins that people use here in Tompkins County, New York. The welded wire, the hard plastic bins, these are good for people who have smaller yards, smaller properties, and they don't need so much space to compost. So for the person who is maybe a renter or has no outdoor space, there are still ways to compost inside. One of the best systems for people with no outdoor space are worm bins. Here are two examples of worm bins. This is a commercial style. It's called the Can-O-Worms. There are other commercial bins available, but it's stackable so that you start out in the bottom. You put your bedding, you put your worms, you put your food scraps. When that one's full, you add another one, you add more paper, you add more food scraps, the worms crawl up. You add another one, and so you're basically expanding how much material you can compost by adding layers of stacks. This is a more do-it-yourself, handmade variety. We tend to use these styrofoam coolers because styrofoam is not recyclable in this part of the world. So we save it from going to the landfill, drill holes in the sides and the bottom, but not the top, and put the worms, the bedding, and the food scraps in there, and the worms eat the food scraps and make compost. So these are things that you can keep inside in your apartment, in a back room, maybe in a basement, in an out-of-the-way place that is heated during the winter. You can see a tremendous amount of mites there. Worms don't do it alone. There are a lot of other creatures that live in worm bins that also help with decomposition. So you can see some of the finished compost, and you can find a lot of things. Like here's a worm egg. You can see the mites that are working on this, and there are lots of other creatures in here besides the worms. But once upon a time, this all used to be shredded newspaper bedding and food scraps, and now it's broken down into compost.
Yes, it's easy to